The morning sun spilled gently across the quiet streets of Hanoi, painting the air with gold and warmth. It was Vietnamese Women's Day, a day filled with flowers, smiles, and love. James stood in front of the flower shop near the lake, the early light reflecting on his thoughtful face. The soft scent of roses and lilies surrounded him as he looked carefully at the colorful bouquets arranged before him. Today was not just another day, it was special. For months, James had been so consumed with work and rebuilding his company that he barely had time to breathe. But this morning, his heart told him to stop, to remember those who had been the gentle strength behind his every success, his mother and Diep. He reached out and picked up two bouquets. The first one soft pink roses wrapped in white lace was for his mother, who had always been there, quiet but unwavering, through his darkest times. The second one delicate white lilies mixed with small daisies was for Diep, the woman who had brought light back into his tired soul. As he held the flowers, James smiled softly. He could already imagine the look on Diep's face when she opened the door, the surprise in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, the way she would say his name with that tender tone only she had. "Two bouquets, right?" the shopkeeper asked, tying the ribbons neatly. "Yes," James replied. "One for my mother and one for someone very special." Outside, the morning breeze brushed against his cheek as he walked toward the car. The city was slowly waking up, children carrying small flowers for their teachers, young men hiding roses behind their backs, laughter echoing from the corner cafes. For James, it wasn't about the grand gestures or expensive gifts, it was about gratitude. He drove first to his mother's house. The garden gate was slightly open, just as he remembered from childhood. When he stepped inside, his mother was already watering her plants. She turned around, her eyes lighting up as she saw him holding the bouquet. "James, you came early today," she said, surprised. He smiled, walking over to her. "Happy Women's Day, Mom. Thank you for everything, for being my strength." His mother's eyes shimmered as she took the bouquet in her hands. "You never forget, do you?" she whispered. "I never could," he replied softly. And in that quiet, tender moment, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the warmth of the morning, James felt something stir deep within his chest, a feeling of peace. Today wasn't just about giving flowers. It was about returning love that had been silently given to him all along. As he stepped back into his car, another destination awaited him, the small white house where Diep lived. He looked at the lilies lying beside him and whispered with a smile, "Let's go make her smile too." The car slowed as James turned onto the familiar small road lined with trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, sprinkling golden specks onto the windshield. The White House at the end of the lane appeared like a scene from a peaceful dream, simple, quiet, but full of life. James parked near the gate, carefully took the bouquet of lilies and daisies from the passenger seat, and stepped out. Diep's garden was filled with blooming bougainvillea climbing over the fence, the pink petals falling gently onto the path. The air smelled faintly of lemongrass and jasmine. James paused for a moment, breathing it in. It reminded him of her, soft, kind, and full of quiet strength. He knocked on the wooden door. Inside, he could hear light footsteps, then Diep's gentle voice. "Who is it?" "It's me," James replied, smiling. The door creaked open, and there she was, wearing a simple white dress, her hair tied loosely behind her shoulders. Her eyes widened when she saw the bouquet. "James, what's all this?" she asked, her lips parting in surprise. He raised the flowers slightly. "Happy Vietnamese Women's Day, Diep. These are for you." For a second, she just stood there, the morning light dancing in her eyes. Then she smiled, a smile that carried warmth enough to melt all the distance between them. She reached out to take the bouquet, her hands brushing against his. "They're beautiful," she whispered, bringing the lilies close to her face. "You remembered." James chuckled softly. "How could I forget? You've taken care of me more than anyone these past months. You deserve every flower in this world." Diep looked down shyly, her cheeks turning a faint pink. "You always know how to make people feel special." He followed her inside. The small house smelled of freshly brewed tea and baked bread. On the table sat two teacups and a small plate of sticky rice cakes, her favorite treat. "You were expecting someone," James teased. She laughed lightly. "No, I was just about to have breakfast. Looks like I have company now." They sat across from each other, the bouquet resting between them. The sunlight filtered through the curtain, painting golden lines on her face. For a long while, neither spoke. There was no need for words. The warmth between them said everything. Finally, James broke the silence. "You know, when I was choosing the flowers, I realized something. Lilies remind me of you, pure, elegant, and strong. You always bloom, no matter how harsh the storm." Diep looked at him, her eyes glistening softly. "And yet, even flowers need someone to water them," she said. James reached across the table, gently holding her hand. "Then let me be the one who never lets you wither." The room fell silent again, but this time it was filled with something tender and unspoken promise. Glowing like morning sunlight, outside, the breeze carried the scent of lilies into the air, as if even nature wanted to celebrate their quiet joy. As the afternoon sun slowly melted into shades of orange, James drove Diep to his mother's house on the edge of the city. The sky glowed softly, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of rice fields and blooming lotus from nearby ponds. James glanced at Diep beside him. She was holding the bouquet of lilies on her lap, carefully protecting each petal as if it were something sacred. When they arrived, his mother was already waiting at the gate. Mrs. Lan, an elderly woman with silver hair and a gentle smile, stood there, wearing her favorite light blue dye. Her eyes sparkled when she saw them. "James, you're finally here," she said warmly, walking toward them. Her gaze shifted to Diep, and her smile grew even brighter. "And you must be Diep. I've heard so much about you." Diep bowed slightly, her voice soft but sincere. "Happy Vietnamese Women's Day, Auntie. It's an honor to meet you." James, holding another bouquet of red roses, stepped forward and presented them to his mother. "Happy Women's Day. Mom, you're the strongest woman I know and the reason I am who I am today." His mother's eyes glistened. She took the roses with trembling hands. "Oh, my son, you've grown so much. You never used to say things like this when you were younger." James laughed, a little embarrassed. "I learned it from someone special," he said, glancing at Diep. Inside the house, the smell of simmering soup filled the air. The table was already set: rice, braised fish, stir-fried vegetables, and a bowl of cankuo, just the way James liked it. Diep quickly offered to help, moving gracefully round the kitchen. James watched her as she chatted and laughed softly with his mother, as if they had known each other for years. The three of them sat together at the dinner table, the candles flickering gently between them. For a moment, James looked at the two women: his mother, who had given him life and taught him strength, and Diep, who had taught him love and patience. He felt something tighten in his chest. This warmth, this laughter was everything he had ever longed for. The house was no longer silent or cold. It was alive, filled with joy and the sound of family. Mrs. Lan smiled as she served rice to Diep. "You take good care of my son, don't you?" she said kindly. Diep blushed, shaking her head. "He's the one who takes care of me, Auntie. He never lets me feel alone." James couldn't help but chuckle. "We take care of each other, Mom. That's what love means." His mother nodded, eyes soft with pride. "Then I can rest easy. Seeing the two of you together, it's all I could ever hope for." As they finished dinner, James raised his glass of tea. "To the women who made my life beautiful," he said, his voice full of emotion. "To you, Mom, and to you, Diep." They clinked their glasses, the sound delicate and pure. Outside, the night sky deepened, and 1,000 stars blinked faintly above the quiet home. In that moment, James knew he was witnessing something rare: a perfect evening of love, gratitude, and belonging. The flowers, the laughter, and the simple meal became a memory that would stay with him forever. After dinner, the three of them moved to the small garden behind the house. The air was cool and fragrant with jasmine. Fireflies flickered faintly among the leaves, and the moon hung low and golden above the quiet countryside. Mrs. Lan sat on the old wooden bench, her hands folded in her lap, looking peaceful. Diep brought her a cup of warm tea, kneeling slightly as she handed it over. "You've done so much for James," she said softly, "and I'm grateful you raised such a kind man." The older woman smiled and reached out to hold Diep's hand. "My dear, kindness grows from being loved. I see the way he looks at you, gentle, protective. You've given him something I couldn't give anymore, peace." James stood a few steps away, listening quietly. The words pierced straight through his heart. For so long, his life had been filled with ambition, pressure, and responsibility. But in that instant, everything felt simple. His success, his titles, his company all faded before the small, sacred moment of love and family. He walked toward them and crouched beside his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I never thanked you enough. For everything. For standing by me when I failed, and for believing in me when no one else did." Mrs. Lan looked at her son with misty eyes. "I only ever wanted one thing, James, that you find happiness, not in money or fame, but in the people who truly love you." James took Diep's hand in his and looked deeply into her eyes. "Then I've already found it." Diep smiled, tears glistening under the moonlight. She couldn't speak, only squeezed his hand tightly. The three of them sat together for a long while, saying little but feeling everything. The stars shimmered like tiny lanterns above them, and the soft hum of crickets filled the silence between their heartbeats. At that moment, James took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I promise you, I will protect her for the rest of my life, and I will make sure you never have to worry again." His mother reached out and gently placed her hand on top of theirs. "That's all a mother ever wants to hear," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Tears welled in James's eyes, but this time, they were not from sorrow. They were tears of fulfillment, of peace. As the wind brushed gently across the garden, Mrs. Lan smiled through her tears. "Today is a Women's Day I will never forget," she said, "because for the first time, I see my son truly happy." James looked at the two women, the pillars of his life, and felt his heart overflow. The world outside could change, fortunes could rise and fall, but this love was unshakable. Under the soft glow of the moon, he whispered, almost to himself, "This is home." And in that quiet night, with flowers blooming and hearts finally at rest, the family of three found their forever happiness not in grand gestures, but in the gentle power of love, gratitude, and belonging. Love is not measured by how much we give, but by how deeply we understand the hearts of those beside us. The story of James, Diep, and Mrs. Lan reminds us that the greatest happiness in life is not found in wealth or success, but in the warmth of family and the sincerity of love. James had spent many years chasing his ambitions, believing that achievements could bring meaning to his life. Yet, it was not until he stood in that quiet garden between his mother and the woman he loved that he finally understood what true fulfillment meant. It was not in applause, but in the gentle presence of people who truly cared for him. Mrs. Lan's love was a mother's quiet strength, the kind that endures storms without complaint, the kind that forgives without words. She had sacrificed her youth and dreams to raise her son, never asking for anything in return. And when she saw her son finally happy, her tears were not of sadness, but of peace. Diep, on the other hand, symbolized the tenderness of love, the kind that heals old wounds and teaches patience. Through her care, she reminded both James and his mother that love is not about perfection. It is about staying when life becomes difficult, about choosing kindness over pride. Their story tells us that happiness often lies in the simplest gestures: a shared meal, a heartfelt word, a bouquet of flowers on a quiet afternoon. These are the moments that define our lives, the ones that we remember long after time has faded everything else. In the end, the flowers James gave were not just gifts. They were symbols of understanding and appreciation, a promise to never take love for granted again. The lesson is clear: gratitude is the soul of love. When we learn to be grateful for those who stand by us, we begin to see how beautiful life truly is. Love, in its purest form, is not loud or grand. It is steady, gentle, and everlasting. So let us remember every day to cherish those who love us quietly, to say thank you, to forgive more easily, and to hold them a little tighter. For one day, when the flowers fade and the world grows silent, it is only love and gratitude that will remain shining in our hearts.